Hey Garfield, look! Marilyn Manson responded to my Heaven Upside Down review. Let's give it a read.
Thank you for the kind review. However, for your safety and for the safety of others, I must request you never make any more videos about me. And stay away from my concerts or other public appearances of mine. Your obsession with Garfield and erratic behavior towards Jim Davis shows me you are a danger to popular artists and fandoms everywhere. Yours in Say 10, MM.
Aww, banned by another musician. I hate when that happens. Well, look on the bright side, Garfield. Manson never said my interpretation of his album was wrong. What? What do you mean you think Heaven Upside Down was just garbage? I mean, Manson's albums are full of meaning, Garfield. He's an artistic genius. I mean, until I told you that Manson made another album, you thought he'd been dead since 1999. What do you think you know about Marilyn Manson? Alright, I'm not going to argue about this with you anymore. Let's just get down to business. I'm going to be reviewing this movie today, Garfield's Fun Fest. It's the sequel to Garfield Gets Real, and this movie came out in 2008, so it'd be the 30th anniversary landmark for Garfield. Before I start this review, let me test something. Okay, looks good. I call that the fair use force field. Now, if you saw my Garfield Gets Real review, I had to black out some of the scenes I used from the movie because of copyright claim. But with this device, hopefully I should be able to use scenes from Garfield's Fun Fest and not have to worry about a copyright strike or anything. Let's get to it. Some boring information out of the way first. Frank Welker, Greg Berg, and all the other voice actors from the previous movie, they reprise their roles and they all do okay jobs. So, nothing really spectacular acting-wise. And unlike the previous movie, there are no special features, unless you count a trailer for Horton Hears a Who as a special feature. So let's just get to the review. The movie opens like a Disney storybook, which is appropriate, I guess, now that Disney owns Fox. And it tells the story of the birth of humor. It all started with a frog named Freddy, and a bunch of forest animals wanted to be funny like Freddy, and they assumed that the pond water Freddy lived in must have been magical, so they drank the water, and that's how humor spread. I have to say, I really like how these storybook illustrations look. They're very nicely drawn and colored. They remind me a lot of illustrations you'd see in old Garfield storybooks like these. I'll put a few on screen. It really makes me wish that these Garfield movies were 2D and they looked like this, rather than just bad-looking CGI. This is something that bugs me, but it's not too important. The characters no longer have outlines around them, like they were visible in Garfield Gets Real, but in this movie and in Garfield's Pet Force, for some reason they were completely forgotten about. I only mention this because Jim Davis himself emphasized these outlines.
When he's in Cartoon World, there's a little faint outline around everything. It's all modeled, it's all shaded, it's all CGI, but there's this little outline as if someone drew a little ink line around everything. When he goes out to the real world, there's no outline anymore. He's very realistic.
We see John do a disco dance while he makes Garfield and Nody breakfast, and he's doing this because there's a talent competition called the Fun Fest coming up. And this dance isn't very well animated, especially when you compare it to John's similar disco dance in Garfield Gets a Life. That was much more wacky. Odie demonstrates a mime act he's going to do for Fun Fest, while Garfield plans to do a comedy act. John suggests that maybe Garfield do something different, like doing a dance with Arlene, and Garfield's like, no, I'm only going to do comedy. And this is going to be Garfield's defining character flaw for the movie. He's way too rigid and he's too overconfident in himself. Now, this is just how I like to interpret the movie, but I like to think after the events of Garfield Gets Real, when Garfield returns to the comic strip world, he appreciates his home a lot more, but then soon that appreciation turns into, arrogance. Garfield becomes too comfortable with himself, and he takes for granted that he's a comic strip legend. And that's why he's so full of hubris in this movie. I don't know if that's what Jim Davis intended, but it's how I like to interpret the movie. So John drives Garfield and Nody to the studio, and they pick up Arlene and Nermal. And Arlene asks Garfield if they can do a dance for Fun Fest, and Garfield continues to be like, no, we're only doing comedy. Is it just me, Garfield, or is this opening kind of familiar? Nermal then asks Garfield if he can be in his comedy act, and Garfield's like, no, you can't do it, Nermal. You're too short.
You're too young and too short to perform with pros like us.
Am not.
You're so short you could pose for trophies.
Aww.
They pass by the gate guard who's doing a dance for Fun Fest, and oh my gosh, that gate guard is horribly animated and modeled. Jeez, I hope I don't see him again. So they go into the studio and they say hi to Billy Bear and Randy Rabbit, and wait a minute, Garfield? Is this the same opening as Garfield Gets Real? What gives? If you look carefully, you can see Shecky and a Chihuahua from the previous movie cameo in the crowd, and I only mention this because this is the only indication that this movie is a sequel to Garfield Gets Real. No one ever mentions, oh, remember the time Garfield went into the real world? The director then comes in and calls for rehearsals for Fun Fest. Garfield briefly says hi to Eli, the technician dude, and Eli gives Garfield a warning.
I heard a rumor about a new strip, and this new guy is supposed to be some tough competition.
Garfield just blows the rumor off, though. We then have the director explain the rules for Fun Fest. It's this big talent competition for all the cartoon characters, and whoever the winner is, they'll have their comic strip at the top of the newspaper. And since Garfield has won Fun Fest for the past 30 years with his comedy act, That's why he's so overconfident in himself right now. We then see the judges for the Fun Fest. It'll be Betty the script lady, Bonita, and Billy's wife we've never seen before, Bonnie Bear. Oh my gosh, she's horribly modeled. It's like Garfield and the main characters had the most effort put into them, while all the side characters, they had less time put into them, and now they look like rejected Five Nights at Freddy's animatronics. Ooh, this next scene is one of Garfield's favorites. He gets to give a whole speech on why he always wins the Fun Fest. He also demonstrates his act from last year, doing a bunch of movie impressions.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a darn.
Why can't you say damn, Garfield? Happy Chapman said damn in your first live-action movie.
The damn cat allergies.
Garfield also imitates Lady and the Tramp, another foreshadowing that Disney would buy Fox. And then once he's all done, Nermal then gives Garfield a very strange stare. What's Nermal planning, Garfield? Garfield and Arlene go backstage, and Arlene continues to beg Garfield, oh, can we do a tango act for FunFest? And Garfield continues to be like, no! We are doing a comedy act!
Arlene, we win with this stuff. Doing something else would be heresy.
Some things are more important than winning, Garfield.
I'll pretend I didn't hear that.
Jeez, Garfield, you're really cranking up the jerk-ass levels here. You're almost as unlikable as the Bill Murray version of you. Anyway, Garfield's like, oh, go find a different dance partner, Arlene, and then right on cue, this guy comes in. Ramon. And yes, it's always said with a Spanish rolling R. Ramon is looking for a dance partner for FunFest and asks Arlene to do the tango with him. So then Arlene and Ramon do this rehearsal dance, and everybody loves it except Garfield, who is super jealous of Ramon. Wait, how did Arlene suddenly get breasts in that outfit? I guess Common Sense Media's complaint about sexual content in these Garfield movies suddenly makes more sense now. Garfield then rehearses a comedy act, but it doesn't go over so well.
You're right, Odie. We sure do feel like mummies tonight. Pressed for time.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I don't get that one.
I met this cat who was really short. How short was he?
He was so short he could pose for trophies?
Yes, something like that.
Huh. How did Ramon know the end of that joke? And where's Nermal? Nobody's asked where he is. This scene is very interesting to me because it feels like, once again, Jim Davis is subtly acknowledging criticisms of Garfield. Oh, he's unfunny, he's too repetitive. I think this is kind of interesting. Like, Jim Davis, I don't know if it's his intention or not, but it's like he's kind of admitting, maybe my critics are right. Garfield goes and talks to Eli again, and Eli is like, Garfield, you really need to polish your act. There's no magic solution to being funny. But then Garfield's like, no, wait, there's that magic funny water in my storybook. I just need to find that pond, drink some of the water, and I'll win FunFest easily. So Garfield reads the book again later that night to try and find any clues to where he can find the magic water pond, and it's to no avail. Then the next morning, Odie looks at the book and he finds an envelope in the back, and he tries to give it to Garfield, but Garfield just blows him off. And this is like another pattern in this movie. Garfield, refuses to listen to anyone and doesn't learn anything, and Odie's actually the one who's, solving all these puzzles for him. I didn't know you were secretly this smart, Odie. Why don't you have a comic strip of your own? Anyway, John then drives Garfield and Odie to the studio and is about to pick up Arlene, but Ramon outspeeds him. Hey, why is Arlene waiting alone at the curb? Where's Nermal? How come no one's asking where Nermal is? So Garfield finally opens the envelope when he's at the studio, and inside is a map to Freddy's Funny Water Pond. Garfield's not certain whether he should look for the pond, but then he walks in on Ramon shooting a comic with Arlene, and that makes him super, super jealous. So then he sets off with Odie to look for the pond.
Man, this thing would be a lot easier to follow if there was a yellow brick road.
Wow, you're really milking these movie references today, aren't you, Garfield? So Garfield and Odie go look for the funny water pond.
I'm on my way from misery to happiness to thee.
So Garfield and Odie go through the mystical forest. Wow, look at that. There's actually an X in the sky, like on the map. That's weird. But then they're stopped by this ugly-looking squirrel who, how many more Freddy Fazbear rejects are we going to see in this movie? The squirrel then gives them a danger presentation about a bear and some alligators that are coming up. The squirrel then asks Garfield a question he must answer honestly in order to pass.
Are you a solo act, or do you rely on others?
I'm strictly solo, pal. I don't need anyone's help.
And at least he didn't ask him what's the airspeed velocity of an unmaiden swallow. The squirrel directs Garfield into the left curtain, but that just leads into a circle. So then Garfield takes the right curtain, but that also goes into a circle. The squirrel then repeats his question. Is he a solo act, or does he rely on others? When Garfield honestly admits that he relies on others, the squirrel then sends him back through the right curtain, saying that when you're honest with your audience, you'll always be right. Or something like that. Why doesn't the right curtain just send you into a circle again, Garfield? Oh, well isn't that convenient? It's the mystical forest. It doesn't have to obey the laws of space and time. Okay, whatever you say, Garfield. So Garfield and Odie continue going through the forest until they hit a fork in the road, and then that bear the squirrel warned them about appears.
Pick a card! Any card!
Yeah, I'd be terrified if this movie's bad model work too. Like, this bear looks even worse than Billy and Bonnie. Like, they couldn't just copy and paste one of their bodies and just change a few shapes. Anyway, this bear isn't threatening at all. He just wastes time doing tricks and bickering with his mother, and then he gives a riddle.
To get to the magic pond tonight, follow your heart, and you'll always be right.
Now, Garfield hears this riddle, and he thinks they must literally go to the right, but Odie picks up on the hidden meaning and says they must go to the left, following one's heart. And then Garfield trusts Odie, and they go that way, and it turns out to be the correct answer. Like, when did you become the canine Hermione Granger, Odie? I'm surprised you're this smart. Next, Garfield and Odie come across an alligator-infested river, and some birds come over and tell Garfield that if he wants to pass safely, he has to distract the alligators by telling them some jokes. So Garfield tries to make the alligators laugh by telling cat jokes, but it falls completely flat.
I was mugged. Yeah, this guy walked up to me and says, "Your money or your 9 lives?" See, because cats have 9 lives.
Good job proving to all your haters you're no longer funny, Garfield. But anyway, Odie saves the day by doing some stupid stuff and makes the alligators laugh, and they're able to pass safely. Jeez, Garfield, why are you so concerned about Ramon beating you at FunFest? I think Odie's got a good chance of winning. So Garfield and Odie think they found the funny water pond, only to be stopped by this guy on a unicycle. Unicycle Man here serves no purpose to the movie. He doesn't give any riddles or any trials or anything. He just stops Garfield, asks what his purpose is, and then lets him go through. This character is a waste of time. Anyway, while Garfield drinks the pond water, the FunFest is already beginning, and Ramon has replaced Garfield as the host. Oh my god, that audience looks horrible! Cut back to Garfield! Anyway, a frog has started to spy on Garfield, and it turns out it's actually Freddy the Frog, the same frog from the storybook. And he's voiced by Tim Conway, the same guy who voices a Barnacle Boy on SpongeBob. Freddy informs Garfield that the funny pond water was actually moved years ago, and what Garfield's actually drinking is a bunch of waste sludge. It would have been nice if Unicycle Dude, gave Garfield a riddle or a hint or something, letting him know that the pond had been moved. How rude. Anyway, Freddy wants to train Garfield to a higher level of enlightenment before he can reach the funny water, and he gives Garfield a stick to play with. Garfield refuses, but Odie catches on and does a bunch of funny stuff with the stick. Jeez. It's no wonder that Odie says this is the best Garfield movie on the DVD cover. It portrays him more competently than Garfield. So Freddy starts to instruct Garfield, and he tries to explain to him that every trial he's had so far has been trying to teach him a different lesson about comedy. And this is where I think Garfield's character arc in this movie kind of falls flat. Like, the first 2 trials, they were just Garfield answering a question honestly and solving a riddle. Nothing really, constructive. If the first trial was something more character building, maybe Garfield has to do a skit with Odie, and that's what teaches him teamwork and relying on others. And then the second trial, maybe Garfield, when he tries to decipher the riddle, he teaches him that jokes often have secondary meanings. And keep the third trial the same, have them actually be character-building activities where Garfield relearns what comedy is. I think that would have been more constructive to Garfield's character arc for this movie. Anyway, Garfield's too impatient and demands that Freddy just take him to the pond water, and Freddy's like, you need to learn patience and humility, Garfield. So Freddy pretends to guide Garfield on a bridge and then gets him trapped on it, and Freddy's like, you're over truthful waters, tell me the truth about your weight. And Garfield tries to bullshit his way out and say, oh, I'm average, and then that just gets Garfield splashed. Garfield continues to get splashed until he realizes that he must tell fat jokes about himself in order to pass.
Okay, I'm so fat. Every time I go to the beach, the tide comes in.
Next thing you know, Garfield will reach comedy nirvana by doing his own version of the Dear Fat People video. Freddy frees Garfield, and then he explains that this trial was supposed to teach Garfield the value of humility and self-deprecating humor. Now, of all the trials Garfield has had in this movie so far, I think this is the only one that's really effective. Garfield is actually challenged, and Odie's not allowed to solve it for him, and Garfield's forced to learn a lesson at the end. If the other trials in this movie were more like this one, I think Garfield's character arc in this movie would have been much stronger. Let's check on the FunFest right now.
The way I dance and sing will make you want to vote for me. Yeah.
It's that horrible-looking guard again! Garfield, you really need to win the FunFest. You don't want that guy headlining the newspaper comics. So then Garfield faces his toughest trial yet, working out by climbing a mountain. I'm sure a fat cat like you would have a lot of trouble with that. So Garfield gets to the top and, hey look, there's the yellow brick road. Garfield sees the funny water pond and he gets really excited and he starts to drink a lot of it up. And he also pulls out a bottle from nowhere and puts in a bit extra there for later. Garfield realizes the sun is setting and that he's going to be late for the FunFest. So Freddy lends him and Odie a glider they can use for their return trip. But Freddy warns Garfield that he still might not be ready, even with the funny water. Garfield just ignores him, and then we get a kind of cool sequence where Garfield and Odie are just gliding down, trying to dodge obstacles and everything. Is it just me, Garfield? But isn't this similar to the end of Garfield Gets Real, where you also had to race against the clock to get back to the studio?
Read my lips. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, okay?
Okay, whatever you say, Garfield. There's a reason people think you're repetitive. Garfield and Odie then crash into the studio attic just as Shecky the cat starts to perform for FunFest. If you like Shecky, I have sad news. This is his only speaking role in the movie. After this, in Garfield's pet force, he completely disappears. What happened to him, Garfield? Maybe Shecky shared the same fate as Lyman. So anyway, Garfield makes his way into Eli's room, and Eli's happy to see Garfield, and he announces that Garfield has returned to the building, and everyone anticipates to see what Garfield will do for FunFest. Garfield decides to have one more drink of funny water, but uh-oh, the bottle is broken. Garfield's now afraid he won't be funny for the FunFest, and he decides to call it quits. Why did you think the funny water you drank at the pond would wear off so quickly, Garfield? So anyway, the FunFest just skips to Arlene and Ramon dancing, and the judges are totally in love with Ramon. Since Bonita and Bonnie Bear are already married, you gotta wonder what their husbands think of this. I'm surprised Common Sense Media doesn't mark this movie up for adultery. So Garfield sits outside the studio sulking to himself, thinking he's lost everything. And then suddenly Freddy comes back somehow, and Garfield asks Freddy for some more funny water. Freddy then tells Garfield the truth. There is no magic funny water. Garfield just drank regular water the whole time, and that storybook is just a storybook. Garfield had to find humor from within himself on his journey. And I would have liked this twist more if it wasn't ripping off Space Jam, but rewatching the movie, it kind of does make sense. Like, Freddy never actually claimed that the funny water made him funny. It was the forest animals that made that assumption, so I guess you could say it was hinted at. After this pep talk, Garfield has a new look of determination on his face. I bet you're going to come up with an awesome comedy act and show Ramon who's boss. So cut back to the FunFest, and Arlene is doing the tango with Ramon, and Ramon's starting to do a bunch of dance moves that make Arlene very dizzy, so she's not starting to like Ramon anymore. And then Garfield comes on stage to save the day, and wait a minute, you're going to do a dance? You're not going to do a comedy act and apply all the lessons you learned, Garfield? What gives? Oh, I guess that makes sense. He wanted to beat Ramon at his own game. Well, at least you're doing something your girlfriend wanted. So Garfield and Ramon start fighting over Arlene, and after struggling a bit, Garfield accidentally pulls off one of Ramon's pant legs and reveals an animatronic leg underneath. Oh my god! After all making all these Five Nights at Freddy's jokes, it turns out one of the characters is an animatronic. So Garfield and Ramon continue to struggle over Arlene, and Garfield manages to pull off almost all of Ramon's limbs, and they all turn out to be mechanical. Then Garfield decides to pull off Ramon's face and Normal!
Normal!
Normal! Normal!
And he would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids. Oops. Sorry, Garfield. Wrong cartoon. The reveal that Normal was Ramon the whole time is really weird when you think about it. Like, that means Arlene and the judges were falling in love with a kitten. Talk about jailbait. Not only that, like, how come no one ever asked where Normal was? Like, maybe they could have had a scene where, like, Normal pretends to be sick or something, and he's like, oh, I can't be at FunFest, I have to stay home. And then he comes in disguised as Ramon, and then there's a fake reason for Normal to not be there. Not only that, like, how did Eli know that a new comic strip character was coming before Normal started to disguise himself? Was Eli precognitive? And what if Normal actually won the FunFest? Like, would he just pretend to be Ramon for the rest of his life? Ah, whatever, I'm asking too many questions. Garfield and Arlene do the tango, Garfield wins the FunFest once again, and everyone's happy except Normal. The end. Oh, and Freddy has a spare glider, so I guess that's how he got down so quick. You know, Garfield, in a movie called Garfield's FunFest, we hardly got to see any of the FunFest. It was just Shecky, that ugly guard, and your dance. That was it. We didn't get to see John do his disco act. Odie was with you the whole time, so he couldn't do his mime act. Billy Bear and Randy Rabbit didn't get to do anything. Like, Grimmy and Dagwood didn't cameo in this movie, so how cool would it have been if they were at FunFest? I mean, this is just a big disappointment. And not only that, I just feel like I've seen this story before. It opens with you having breakfast, pick up Arlene and Normal, you go to the studio and say hi to everyone there, you feel dissatisfied with yourself and go on a quest with Odie and learn some life lessons, a competitor appears that threatens to take away your popularity, there's a race against the clock to get back to the studio, and the movie ends with you dancing with Arlene. Garfield's FunFest tells almost the same story as Garfield Gets Real. And arguably, these movies weren't all that original either. I mean, Garfield goes on a trip away from home. That's Garfield on the Town. Garfield enters a talent competition. That's Garfield Goes Hollywood. Yeah, just ripping off old stories from the TV specials. Okay, it's not really entirely fair of me to say that Garfield's FunFest is just a total rip-off of previous Garfield stories. Like, it did try to do a couple different things, like having the plot twist that Ramon was Normal the whole time. I guess you could say that's like Garfield created his own villain by how poorly he treated Normal. And not only that, the whole twist that the funny water was just a placebo. I think the whole moral of the movie, that not to let success go to your head and that there's no easy way to success, like, I think that's a much more clear moral than whatever Garfield Gets Real was trying to say. Reality is where your heart is. Like, I don't even know what that means still. So, I originally said that I think Garfield Gets Real is the least worst of the 3 DVD movies and that they don't get better after that, but actually thinking about it, Garfield's Fun Fest is not really that bad a movie. I mean, it is still dragged down by its flaws. Like, Garfield's story arc could have been much stronger, like giving him tougher trials, and, you know, that scene at the end where he's in the alley with Freddy, I think Garfield himself should have came to the realization that the funny water is a placebo and that, you know, the journey he was going through was what mattered. Like, just having Freddy just tell him that's the case, like, it's like Garfield didn't actually learn anything. It should have been Garfield realizing all that on his own. Yeah, so, oh well. Despite all these movies' flaws, I would still watch these over those Bill Murray movies. Ugh, CGI Garfield is just horrible looking. That's all I have to say about Garfield's Fun Fest. It's flawed, but not as bad as I remember it. Anyway, what did you think, Garfield? I know you'd have a higher opinion since you were actually in the movie. Oh, really? Garfield thinks the movie is so great it should be shown in all comedian schools. Well, I can't really disagree with you, Garfield. I mean, Freddy Frog's advice is pretty useful, even if the movie isn't all that good. Oh, I know someone who could really use this movie right now, Garfield. Have you ever heard of 2 the Ranting Griffin? You haven't? Oh, well, he's this furry comedian who used to do a show at Anthrocon, but then he was, like, dropped last year because his attendance numbers were going down, and he's also pretty controversial because he said insensitive stuff towards depressed people and other stuff like that. Yeah, but I bet this movie would help him refocus his career. Let me bring up his Twitter right now. Let's see. Okay. What am I going to say to him? Oh, I know! Okay. There we go, Garfield. I'm preaching the gospel of lasagna to another furry today. There we go. I hope 2 Griffin likes my message, and I hope he doesn't ban me from his future shows like Marilyn Manson did. Anyway, Peter the Cat here. Bye, everybody, and tune in next time, because I'm going to review Garfield's Pet Force next. It's the final DVD movie in this trilogy, so let's see how Jim Davis ends this series. Hey, Garfield, look! The director of your DVD movies, Mark A.Z. Dippe, he directed the Spawn movie too, and your voice actor Frank Welker was in that movie also. He voiced the villain. I find that really funny, Garfield. You want to know why? Well, you just called Marilyn Manson's music garbage, but he did a song for that movie, The Long Hard Road Out of Hell. It looks like your director has a higher opinion of Manson than you do.